The royal revelation unfolds not as rumour, not as speculation, but as a decisive unveiling that shakes both the visible and invisible realms at once. Archives once buried beneath layers of dust and iron authority have been opened, records examined, seals broken, and the conclusion announced without hesitation: the bloodline stands confirmed. What heaven whispered across centuries has now echoed through earthly institutions. The words of 1 Peter 2:9 rise with fresh resonance, declaring a chosen generation and a royal priesthood, while Revelation 1:6 reminds that this kingship is not pending but already established, and Psalm 45:6 anchors the throne in eternity rather than in fragile human systems. The convergence is not coincidence, it is alignment. The revelation does not create identity, it exposes it. You're not becoming royal, you're remembering that you already are. The ink on parchment is simply catching up to what was written in spirit long ago, yet proof alone is not the destination. Revelation carries weight, and weight demands response. A crown shown but not received remains suspended. If this truth resonates, do not let it pass as inspiration alone. Step fully into it, engage with it, declare it. Share this message with someone who has felt set apart but could never name why. Affirm in your heart and even in the comments that you accept the mantle placed upon you, because recognition without response fades, but recognition embraced becomes activation. The seal has been revealed. Now the question stands before you: will you rise to meet it? As the unveiling deepens, earthly proof mirrors heavenly decree in a way that reveals how closely the visible realm trails behind the invisible one. The discovery of sealed archives was not theatrical fiction, but the quiet culmination of preservation across generations. Drawers that had not been opened in decades were unlatched. Ribbons that had not felt light were loosened. Archivists traced names with deliberate care, validating lineage through documentation so meticulous it left no room for doubt. Official confirmation followed, protocol signatures aligned, and announcements were prepared with the sober weight of institutional authority. Soon media outlets amplified the message, headlines travelled across screens, commentators analysed implications, and the public absorbed the shock of recognition. Yet, in all the spectacle, something subtler carried greater importance. The government's acknowledgement did not invent identity. It merely recognized what had always existed. Institutions can confirm, they cannot create destiny. The parchment did not grant royalty, it testified to it. And this pattern reflects a deeper law. Earthly systems often validate what heaven has already decreed. When Scripture declares that we've been made kings and priests, it speaks in completed tense. The transformation in spirit precedes the confirmation in flesh. Earth bends to echo heaven, not the other way around. Identity, therefore, stands independent of public awareness. Long before cameras broadcast headlines, the seal was impressed upon the spirit. Long before signatures were inked, the decree was spoken. What surfaced in archives was only the shadow of a more ancient proclamation. This is why identity anchored solely in genealogy is incomplete. Bloodlines tell part of the story, but calling transcends ancestry. Spiritual inheritance surpasses biological descent. The throne referenced in Psalm 45 is not temporary, not political, not subject to elections or revolutions. It is eternal. The scepter is righteousness, not privilege. The crown is assignment, not ornament. When earthly confirmation aligns with a heavenly decree, it signals timing rather than creation. It signals that the moment of recognition has arrived. And recognition is never casual. It arrives when readiness meets necessity. The world may interpret such proof as historical curiosity, but those attuned to deeper currents recognize it as activation. The archives were opened because the hour demanded clarity. The announcement was released because concealment had completed its purpose. Heaven allows confirmation to surface when concealment is no longer required for preparation. Thus, the mirror stands clear. What is documented in institutions reflects what was declared in eternity. The visible world has simply caught up to the invisible truth. And as this truth settles, the signs of royalty in daily life emerge, not as grand ceremonies, but as quiet confirmations woven through ordinary moments. Long before any archive was opened, subtle patterns whispered identity through daily experience. You may recall entering rooms where conversation shifted without effort, where respect flowed without demand, where attention gathered naturally around your presence. That was not performance, it was resonance. Authority often speaks before words are formed. Others may not articulate why they look to you in moments of uncertainty, yet their instinct reveals recognition. Leadership is sensed before it is proclaimed. Even recurring imagery has carried quiet symbolism. Crowns appearing in unexpected places, references to kingship in songs or conversations, at precisely the moments you wrestled with purpose, friends, jokingly calling you majestic without realizing they echoed something ancient. These are not coincidences arranged by randomness. They are confirmations woven with deliberate care. There has also been the internal awareness, the weight of responsibility that arrived early in life, the sense of being set apart without clear explanation. Sometimes it felt isolating, sometimes it felt heavy. Yet separation often precedes consecration. The discomfort of difference frequently signals preparation rather than rejection. When others felt content with ordinary paths, you sensed a deeper assignment stirring beneath the surface. That stirring is not ego, it is imprint. Royal calling manifests first as responsibility, not privilege. It compels order where there is chaos, justice where there is imbalance, clarity where there is confusion. Life itself becomes testimony. The respect shown by others, the instinctive deference in decision-making, the recurring motifs that echo kingship, the internal compass that resists complacency, all form a tapestry too consistent to dismiss. The government may provide parchment proof, but lived experience has provided daily evidence for years. True royalty does not chase validation. It carries dignity until validation arrives. And when validation finally surfaces, it does not create the crown, it confirms it. Thus, daily life stands as living documentation. Every interaction, every unexplained honor, every persistent sense of purpose has been whispering the same refrain: you were born not merely to exist, but to lead with humility and strength. The signs have surrounded you not to inflate ego, but to anchor identity. And now, with proof unveiled and patterns recognized, the invitation is clear. Step fully into the awareness that what has been subtly confirmed for years is no longer subtle. It is acknowledged, it is aligned, it is active. The crown that once felt like intuition now stands as declaration. The calling that once felt like longing now stands as commission, and the life that once felt set apart now reveals itself as set apart for a reason. As the story advances, the timing of revelation becomes impossible to ignore, because the question rises naturally in any discerning mind: why now and not 10 years ago? Not a generation earlier, not in some quieter decade when fewer eyes were watching. Archives do not open themselves. Institutions do not suddenly awaken without process. Documents sealed across administrations, protected through wars and political transitions, remain hidden unless a convergence of necessity and authorization occurs. The timing, therefore, is not random bureaucracy, it is alignment. Divine timing rarely announces itself with fireworks, it reveals itself through convergence. An appointed season is not determined by convenience, but by readiness, and readiness is never about comfort. It is about capacity. For years, concealment served preparation. Hidden seasons build internal architecture strong enough to bear external recognition. If confirmation had surfaced too early, it would have crowned immaturity. If it had surfaced too late, it would have delayed assignment. Now is the moment, because now you can carry what is revealed. The world's instability underscores the urgency of that alignment. Look at the cultural atmosphere, leaders rising and falling in rapid succession, institutions shaking under public distrust, moral compasses spinning under pressure of competing ideologies. In such climates, prestige becomes noise, but consecrated leadership becomes oxygen. When confusion thickens, clarity becomes rare currency. When authority fractures, authentic authority stands out like a lighthouse against fog. The revelation surfaces not to flatter you, but to position you. Royalty in this context is not about status elevation, but about structural stability. A crown in a chaotic generation is not decoration, it is anchor. Prestige seeks applause, but responsibility seeks service. The distinction matters deeply. If this unveiling were about prestige, it could have arrived in any era. Prestige thrives in applause. Responsibility emerges in crisis. You're being revealed not because the world is calm, but because it is unsettled. Instability creates vacuum, and vacuums demand filling. The archive's opening now is less about your curiosity and more about collective necessity. Recognition, therefore, signals activation into assignment. It is not a ceremonial conclusion. It is a commissioning. Consider the rhythm of scripture and history. Alike, revelation precedes responsibility, but responsibility always follows revelation. When identity becomes clear, function must follow. The timing indicates that the preparation phase has met its threshold. The internal architecture built through solitude, misunderstanding, and perseverance now meets external confirmation. It is not coincidence that doors align, conversations accelerate, and opportunities gather momentum in similar seasons. Heaven does not reveal without intending to deploy. The appointed season means you are no longer in rehearsal. The unveiling indicates that private development has reached public readiness. The world's instability is not accidental background, it is context. Context determines calling. When injustice rises, those marked for justice are revealed. When disorder multiplies, those shaped for order are summoned. Royalty in this sense is not insulated comfort, but embodied responsibility. It requires steadiness when others panic, vision when others despair, and humility when others scramble for recognition. The timing says you are needed, not admired. Needed leaders do not emerge randomly, they're unveiled deliberately. The archives were opened because concealment had fulfilled its purpose. Divine timing is not impatient, nor is it late. It is precise. Precision means that this revelation could not have occurred in another hour without distortion. Now you can absorb it without arrogance. Now you can carry it without claps. Now you can interpret it as assignment rather than applause. Recognition is activation. Activation is responsibility. Responsibility is service. And service, when anchored in royal identity, becomes transformative rather than performative. From that realization flows the undeniable weight of urgency of response, because once a seal has been broken, it cannot be restored to secrecy. The wax does not reform. The ribbon does not retie itself. Revelation is irreversible. When truth emerges into light, it changes the landscape permanently. You cannot unknow what you now know. You cannot return to the neutrality of uncertainty. This is why revelation demands action. Knowledge without response becomes burden rather than blessing. The moment proof surfaces, choice enters. Delay may appear wise on the surface, cloaked in language of caution and contemplation, but delay can also become subtle resistance. There are seasons where waiting refines, and there are seasons where waiting forfeits. Discernment distinguishes the two. This moment does not carry the atmosphere of passive reflection. It carries the atmosphere of activation. The seal is active now, not pending further review. Urgency does not mean panic. It means clarity about window. Windows of appointment do not remain open indefinitely. History is filled with moments where hesitation cost generations opportunity. When anointing oil touched the head of David, he did not deny the weight of the call, even though the throne was not immediately his. He internalized the commission and aligned his actions accordingly. When Isaiah heard the question, "Whom shall I send?" his response was immediate. "Here am I, send me." Immediate response did not eliminate preparation, it accelerated alignment. When Peter left his nets at the shoreline, he did not request a later date. Recognition of voice produced movement of feet. These examples illustrate a principle: when calling becomes clear, delay becomes dangerous. The urgency embedded in revelation is not coercion, it is invitation sharpened by timing. You stand in similar tension. The broken seal signals that concealment is no longer protective. The crown hovering is not ornamental suggestion, it is active commission. To postpone acceptance under guise of caution risks allowing momentum to dissipate. Momentum matters in seasons of activation. Heaven aligns circumstances in clusters, not scattered fragments. Doors open simultaneously. Conversations align in sequence. Confirmations echo in repetition. Such clustering is signal. To respond within that window is to cooperate with alignment. To delay is to disrupt rhythm. The call is active now, not next quarter, not after further validation, not when comfort returns. Comfort rarely accompanies calling. Urgency often feels like pressure, but pressure refines diamond and forges steel. Some may interpret this stirring as anxiety. It is not. Anxiety unsettles without direction. Urgency directs without confusion. It carries clarity of purpose. When revelation meets readiness, action must follow. Think again of scriptural precedent when Esther recognized her appointed time. The realization that she had come for such a time as this did not produce retreat. It produced courageous approach. She moved despite risk because clarity overruled hesitation. Urgency is not reckless, it is courageous. It understands that revelation without embodiment remains incomplete. You've seen the proof, you've recognized the signs, you've discerned the timing. Now response seals alignment. Without response, recognition remains theoretical. With response, recognition becomes covenant. The broken seal signifies that neutrality is no longer option. Acceptance or avoidance will both shape trajectory. Choosing to step forward aligns you with momentum already in motion. Choosing to shrink back introduces friction against flow. The window stands open. The crown is not distant future, it is present commission. Urgency invites you not to rush blindly, but to move deliberately within appointed hour. The call does not whisper of someday, it declares of now. And now, when embraced with clarity and humility, becomes the birthplace of fulfilled assignment. As the unfolding deepens, the tension between proof and purpose becomes the next threshold you must cross, because proof, no matter how undeniable, is only the foundation upon which something greater must be built. Proof establishes identity with clarity that cannot be contested. It answers the question that once lingered in quiet corners of your mind. Who am I truly? The archive spoke. The scriptures aligned, the signs converged, identity stands confirmed. Yet identity, while powerful, is static if left alone. A title declared but never embodied becomes ornamental. A crown acknowledged but never worn with intention remains symbolic rather than transformative. Purpose, however, defines mission. It animates identity. It converts recognition into responsibility. Identity answers who you are. Purpose answers why you are here. These two must converge if destiny is to move from abstraction into action. Consider the distinction carefully. Identity without purpose can drift toward complacency. Purpose without identity can drift toward insecurity. But when identity is rooted and purpose is embraced, there is stability with direction, confidence, with humility, authority with service. Royalty must move from recognition to expression, or else it risks becoming a museum artifact instead of a living commission. A throne exists to govern, not to decorate a hall. A scepter exists to establish justice, not to glitter in display cases. When proof surfaced, it resolved doubt about origin. When purpose awakens, it resolves doubt about direction. This is the pivot point. Many receive confirmation and stop there satisfied that the question of worth has been answered. But confirmation is not culmination. It is commencement. You are not shown proof to settle into comfort. You are shown proof to rise into calling. Ask yourself what shifts when identity transitions into mission. The internal dialogue changes from am I worthy to what must I steward. It shifts from do I belong to whom am I assigned to serve. Identity is personal affirmation. Purpose is relational activation. Identity secures the heart. Purpose mobilizes the hands. When Scripture declares kings and priests, it does not describe decorative status, but functional responsibility. Kings govern with wisdom. Priests intercede with compassion. Both roles require movement. Both demand engagement. Identity without engagement grows stale. Purpose without grounding grows unstable. The alignment of both produces transformation not only within you, but around you. Proof answered who you are in the eternal narrative. Purpose reveals why you're positioned in this particular generation. Generations differ. Context shifts. Needs fluctuate. The why of your calling is tethered to the current landscape. Look at the instability you observe, the hunger for integrity, the longing for leaders who combine strength with humility. Your purpose intersects with that hunger. That is why recognition has surfaced now. Identity without purpose would leave you introspective. Purpose without identity would leave you reactive. But together they create strategic clarity. Royalty expressed means embodying values consistently, not occasionally. It means choosing justice over convenience, courage over comfort, discipline over distraction. Recognition must be translated into behavior. Expression validates identity more powerfully than declaration alone. The crown's brilliance is not in its material, but in its manifestation through action. When you move from recognition to expression, you cease to ask permission to exist in your role. You begin to steward influence intentionally. Influence is not dominance, it is impact. It is the quiet recalibration of environments because you are present. It is the steadying of chaos because your internal order spills outward. Identity assures you that you are anchored. Purpose directs you to where you must apply that anchor. This is the maturation of royalty. It does not seek applause. It seeks alignment. It does not demand visibility. It pursues integrity. When identity and purpose synchronize, hesitation diminishes because direction clarifies. The archives may have proven lineage, but your daily obedience will prove legacy. Legacy is not inherited, it is built. Proof secures the past, purpose constructs the future. The shift from recognition to expression requires courage, because expression exposes you to scrutiny. Yet scrutiny cannot erase identity already established. Expression simply demonstrates that identity is alive. You're not royal merely in theory. You're royal in function. You're not crowned to contemplate endlessly. You're crowned to contribute meaningfully. The movement from proof to purpose is the movement from contemplation to commission. It is where potential becomes practice. It is where assurance becomes action, and once you step into that alignment, something remarkable occurs. The external world begins to respond to the internal shift. That response unfolds as daily confirmations continue because heaven does not reveal identity once and withdraw reinforcement. It confirms, persistently weaving affirmation through ordinary rhythms so that doubt cannot quietly reclaim territory. Ongoing signs reinforce identity not as spectacle but as steady whisper. You may notice that conversations align with themes of leadership at moments when you are evaluating your next step. You may encounter words spoken by others that feel strangely precise, as if they echo something deeper than casual observation. Compliments that reference your steadiness, your clarity, your presence carry more than politeness. They carry resonance. Words spoken by others often function as echoes of heaven. They may not recognize the weight of what they say, but their language mirrors internal truths. A colleague remarks that you bring order to confusion. A friend says your calm steadies a room. A stranger comments on an authority they cannot explain. These are not inflated flattery. They are confirmations of imprint. Leadership instincts surface naturally because they are embedded within calling. You feel compelled to address imbalance rather than ignore it. You sense responsibility where others see inconvenience. You're disturbed by injustice in ways that push you toward action rather than complaint. These instincts are not personality quirks. They're indicators of alignment. Royal identity shapes reflexes. You gravitate toward order because disorder contradicts your design. You pursue justice because righteousness defines your inheritance. Even symbols continue to align with uncanny timing. Crown imagery appearing when you contemplate direction. Language about kingship surfacing in media when you seek reassurance. Repetition is signal. Randomness rarely repeats with thematic consistency. Alignment of symbols and timing suggests orchestration rather than coincidence. Heaven confirms identity both internally and externally because confirmation must anchor both mind and environment. Internal assurance alone can be dismissed as imagination. External signs alone can be dismissed as chance. Together they form convergence. Convergence builds conviction. Conviction fuels consistency. As you step further into purpose, confirmations do not cease, they intensify. Not necessarily in dramatic displays, but in subtle reinforcement that strengthens resolve. A door opens unexpectedly at the precise moment courage rises. A conversation affirms direction immediately after you commit privately. A resource appears when obedience requires it. These patterns are not arbitrary, they are partnership. Heaven's confirmation does not eliminate effort, it accompanies effort. It reassures without replacing responsibility. You begin to notice that when you act in alignment with identity, circumstances often cooperate in surprising ways. Not perfectly, not without resistance, but with underlying cohesion. Resistance itself can become confirmation. Opposition often surfaces when movement threatens stagnation. When you choose integrity in environments accustomed to compromise, tension arises. That tension confirms distinction. Daily confirmations are not limited to applause. They include the strengthening of character through challenge. When you refuse to retreat into mediocrity, you sense reinforcement within. Peace stabilizes you in difficult decisions. Clarity sharpens in moments of risk. These internal experiences are confirmations as much as external signs. Heaven confirms identity through peace that persists under pressure, through conviction that remains steady despite criticism, through opportunities that align when obedience precedes visibility. The more you walk in purpose, the more you recognize that confirmation is not event-based but lifestyle-based. It is woven into rhythm. It appears in the consistent echo of truth across multiple dimensions of experience. Identity confirmed once becomes identity reinforced continually. and reinforcement builds resilience. Resilience ensures that expression does not falter under scrutiny. You become less dependent on spectacular signs because subtle confirmations suffice. The steady whisper becomes louder than external noise. You begin to recognize that identity once proven does not need constant dramatic validation. It thrives on quiet reinforcement, and yet those reinforcements keep coming through words spoken unexpectedly, through instincts that guide wisely, through symbols that align with uncanny precision, through doors that open in sequence, through resistance that refines strength. Heaven confirms both inward assurance and outward evidence, because purpose requires endurance. Endurance requires conviction. Conviction requires confirmation. Thus, daily life continues to echo the same refrain you first heard in Revelation. You're chosen, you're positioned, you are assigned. The difference now is that you no longer interpret these signs as coincidence. You interpret them as continuity, proof-anchored identity, purpose-activated mission. Daily confirmations sustain momentum, and momentum sustained through reinforcement ensures that recognition matures into legacy. As the journey reaches its decisive threshold, sealing the covenant through action becomes the natural and necessary culmination of everything that has been revealed, because throughout history, revelation has never been meant to linger in abstraction. There has always been a moment when what was heard had to be embodied, when what was understood had to be enacted. In ancient times, spiritual calling was not left suspended in theory. Oil was poured upon heads, altars were built from gathered stones, robes were placed upon shoulders, staffs were lifted in obedience. These physical acts were never about spectacle. They were about sealing. They marked the transition from awareness to alignment. When Jacob encountered divine presence, he set up a stone as witness. When David was anointed, oil made visible what heaven had spoken invisibly. When covenants were formed, tokens were exchanged to anchor promise in memory. The pattern is consistent across centuries. Revelation invites embodiment. Without embodiment, revelation remains vulnerable to erosion. With embodiment, revelation becomes covenant. That is why this moment calls for more than contemplation. It calls for a tangible declaration. A declaration does not inform heaven of something it does not know. It informs your own spirit that you have chosen alignment. Words spoken aloud carry power because they cross the threshold from thought and into commitment. Action taken deliberately engraves intention into memory. This is not about performance. It is about partnership. The offering, therefore, is symbolic covenant, not transaction. A crown cannot be purchased. Calling cannot be bought. Assignment cannot be negotiated with currency. But symbolic acts matter because they root intention in reality. Sacrifice has always been language of seriousness. It signals that what is embraced is valued. When the widow offered oil, it was not the quantity, but the trust represented. When the boy offered bread and fish, it was not the size, but the surrender embodied. In the same way, any act of offering connected to this moment is not payment for identity. It is participation in covenant. It declares, I do not merely agree intellectually, I align actively. Action transforms revelation into commitment because commitment introduces accountability. Once you step forward, neutrality dissolves. You have crossed from observer to participant, from listener to steward, from inspired to commissioned. This is where many hesitate, not because they doubt the revelation, but because they understand the weight of commitment. Commitment implies continuity. It implies that tomorrow must reflect what today has declared. Yet this weight is not meant to intimidate. It is meant to dignify. Responsibility dignifies identity. To be entrusted with calling is to be trusted with impact. And impact requires decision. Response distinguishes those who step fully into calling from those who admire calling at a distance. Admiration is comfortable. Participation is costly. Admiration applauds. Participation builds. The covenant is sealed not because heaven demands spectacle, but because your spirit requires anchoring. When you mark a moment intentionally, you create reference point. In seasons of doubt, you return to that marker and remember, I chose alignment. I sealed the crown. I accepted the commission. The act becomes memorial. It reminds you that identity was not accidental and purpose was not imposed. It was embraced. Through that embrace, revelation becomes legacy in motion rather than memory fading. And as this sealing takes place, something shifts internally. Authority feels less abstract and more integrated. Responsibility feels less intimidating and more purposeful. The crown ceases to hover symbolically and begins to rest functionally. You no longer question whether you're called. You begin to ask how to steward the call faithfully. That is the power of embodied declaration. It moves you from contemplation into consecration. It aligns spirit and action. It closes the gap between knowing and doing. And when that gap closes, momentum accelerates because hesitation no longer fragments direction. Thus we arrive at the inevitable culmination crowned for purpose where everything converges into clarity. Proof has been shown beyond reasonable doubt. The archives opened, the scriptures resonated, the external and internal confirmations aligned in harmony. Signs have been confirmed repeatedly in daily life in words spoken by others, in instincts that stirred before recognition ever surfaced publicly. Timing is aligned with precision that cannot be dismissed as coincidence. The instability of the world underscores the necessity of consecrated leadership. Identity is clear, no longer shadowed by uncertainty or diluted by doubt, and with clarity comes responsibility. The crown you carry is not ornamental, it is functional. It exists not to elevate you above others, but to position you among them as servant leader. To accept the crown is to embrace the mission. To embrace the mission is to step fully into purpose. This final call is not theatrical, it is transformational. Accepting the crown does not inflate ego. It anchors humility because true royalty understands stewardship. Embracing the mission does not isolate you. It integrates you into service. Stepping into purpose does not guarantee ease, it guarantees meaning. Meaning sustains when comfort fades. Meaning strengthens when opposition arises. Meaning clarifies when confusion thickens. You stand at intersection of revelation and response. The path forward does not require perfect understanding of every detail. It requires decisive alignment with the truth already revealed. Accept the crown not as ornament but as obligation. Embrace the mission not as burden but as privilege. Step into purpose not timidly but deliberately. The convergence of proof, sign, timing, and identity has prepared you for this movement. The crown is not future aspiration, it is present commission. The mission is not distant horizon, it is immediate horizon. Purpose is not abstract theory, it is lived expression. Let your actions reflect the clarity you have received. Let your leadership mirror the humility you have cultivated. Let your presence carry the steadiness that instability cannot shake. The revelation was not accidental. The confirmation was not premature. The timing was not arbitrary. The identity was not fabricated. Everything aligns for this moment, and this moment asks only one thing in return: that you rise.